Hello English learners, welcome back to our English lessons presented by Miss Lichuti for both FAL and home language, but now we are focusing on home language series. We have done comprehension line of examination concepts. Now let us do it practically with the 2023 final paper, November final paper, where we go through the comprehension and test our skill as far as understanding and familiarizing ourselves, or if not even familiarizing, mastering the art of understanding comprehension concepts, as well as the line of examination for comprehension. As I have guided you in our previous video, home language candidates, it's important to start first with the title. I've always said that a title should give you an indication of what the text is going to talk about, right? And then also byline, not forgetting the byline, which further gives us more clue on what the crux, if not the nub of the comprehension, will be centered around what. Listening instead of reading is not cheating. Now, my question, it will be listening to what? Instead of what? Reading. Okay, and then is not, so it means the comprehension must give me reasons why. So that's for, it's an argumentative line that will give us facts as to why is it not considered reading. So if you say listening, what comes to my mind is audiobooks, because we are speaking about what? Reading. So this is going to be an interesting comprehension, which is sort of a comparative analysis between audiobooks and reading traditionally. Then the byline says, from audiobooks to podcast and voice notes, there's a steady generational shift. Exactly what I've just said, and I've already identified that by just simply analyzing the title. In a way we understand the world. So it therefore means that the nub of this comprehension is centered around reading versus now the shift, that generational shift, where we are shifting from traditional reading to now audio, listening to audiobooks, bearing in mind the title, listening instead of reading is not cheating. Right. Then we start with the introductory paragraph. Insomniacs, coming from the word insomnia, people who suffer from, and please bear in mind of glossary when you are given words such as one. It is important to go through the glossary so that you familiarize yourselves in cases where it's a new vocabulary to you. Do it in the middle of the night. Dog owners do it while trotting around the park. Some people do it in the gym, but lately I have taken to doing it alone in the car, on long journeys, not through the dark when I need distraction from everything circling around what my head. So this is an introductory paragraph which still leaves the reader in suspension, because it says doing it. Insomniac, do it. We still don't know what this it is. Is it now related to listening to audiobooks? So the succeeding paragraphs will provide more details. Right. Now it says listening, that is. Take note of punctuation. Listening, comma, that is a semicolon. And perhaps more specifically, listening to things you might once have read instead. The growth of audiobooks, podcasts, and even voice notes, those quick self-recorded clips that are steadily taking over from typed message on WhatsApp, reflect a steady generational shift away from eyes to ears, right? Remember, eyes here, it will imply what? Reading. And then, of course, ears here now will speak to what? Listening to audiobooks, in comparison to what? Traditionally reading the actual book, as a way we take in the world, and perhaps also in how we understand it. And then take note of the personal pronouns we. Remember, the use of pronouns we is for inclusive purpose, to include who? The reader, so that the reader is involved and persuaded by the facts that are presented by the author here. So you see, Gretos, this is how you read, right? For the first time, you can just go through the comprehension without doing what I'm doing now. But now, the second time when you read the comprehension, practice what we call close reading. You pay specific attention to diction, and all the number of comprehension techniques that are used in this particular paragraph. Reading instinctively feels like the higher art, perhaps because bedtime stories used to be strictly for children and oral storytelling is associated with more primitive cultures in the days before the printing press. But is that fair? Then you remember that this is a rhetorical question. Remember, the purpose of rhetorical question is to evoke interest from the reader's side and to make the reader to delve deeper and think much more deeper about what is being discussed. Now, what is being discussed here is, remember, we are now migrating from reading to audiobooks. Now, it says reading instinctively. Diction, let's look into the word right? And when you say reading instinctively, when you read instinctively, it means understanding or interpreting text naturally. And then primitive cultures will then refer to early or traditional societies. Right. Now, the purpose of rhetorical question, without even, whenever you see a question whenever you see a rhetorical question in a comprehension, already ask yourself, what is it the author wants to achieve with this inclusion of this rhetorical question? What is it the author wants to prompt me to think deeper about? Now, the line of argument is that reading instinctively feels like the higher art, perhaps because bedtime stories used to be strictly for children and oral storytelling is associated with more primitive culture in the days before the printing press. But is this fair? If the effort involved in sitting down and decoding written text with your actual eyes were to gradually fade away in years to come, just as the old-fashioned cord of a landline phone gave away to the freedom of a mobile in your pocket, and cash yielded to the clinical efficiency or credit cards, what exactly would we have lost? Now, the author wants us to think about the impact of this shift. The impact of shifting from traditional reading towards now the use of what? Audiobooks. You see, that is what we mean by context, right? Then we move along. Reading is still very far from dead, right? Lockdown rekindled the love of curling up with a good novel, to publishers' delight, with more than a third of people claiming to be reading more to fill their days. But the audiobook market, while still small, also notched up its 7th year of double-digit growth in 2021 pandemic year. So paragraph 4 shows that even though we are migrating towards audiobooks, there's still that significant impact of traditional reading, because audiobooks are still at their premature stage. Because historical background is that during the 2021 pandemic, a lot of people found themselves now reading. Millennials in particular seem to be all ears as mentioned by Kurt Vanek-Smith, the former of Wall Street Journal president, admitted recently that when its members, who are mostly under 39 years of age, were asked what they wanted to read, the consensus was, actually, I listen, I don't read. But their parents do so too. All the overloaded, frantically multitasking midlifers trying to keep up with whatever they are afraid of missing out in an information saturated world while going for a run or cooking dinner. Yet the idea prevails that listening is flighty or unserious. A snooty 55% of respondents to one of YouGov survey, now this is factual information, back in 2016 deemed audiobooks a lesser way of consuming literature, and only 10% thought listening to a book was wholly equal to reading it. The view that listening, the view that listening is cheating prevails, which now, even though nobody thinks it is lazy for a student to sit through lectures, and going to the theater is not considered intellectually inferior to reading the play at home. One study by Beth Roxko, Associate Professor of Education at Bloomsburg University, asking students either to read a non-fiction book or listen to the audio version, found no significant difference in how much of it they absorbed. Right. Now, these are factual information presenting the lines of argument between the impact of reading or adhering to traditional reading versus audio, listening to audio books. In paragraph 6, there is an intimacy too, a confessional air that suits soul-bearing podcast interviews and taboo-busting discussions about sex or menopause or parenting, and to hear a book read by its author is something easier to understand by the inflections of their voice, a meaning you would not otherwise have picked up. Voice note suit the perennial anxious young in much the same way because they are less intrusive than a phone call and harder to misunderstand than text. People can hear when you are being ironic, lessening the risk of accidental causing what offense. So this line, paragraph 6, simply gives the benefits of audio and argues as to why is it important to listen to audiobooks. What troubles me most about listening? Now, the author here gives a personal account, meaning that here I suppose is that it is harder to share. You can recommend a podcast to a friend, but you cannot leave it on the train seat for the next person when you get off, as I have done all my life with finished newspapers. You cannot give your goddaughter your dog-eared, spine-cracked copy of an audiobook that meant everything to you when you were her age. Now, another line of argument here, it presents sort of the negative aspects of audiobooks, to say there is no traditional feel of the actual book that you can easily hand it down to the next generation, right? You will never buy an old book from a second-hand store and find somebody else's faded notes scribbled in the margin, or a long forgotten postcard used as a bookmark that makes you want to know more about the life of the person who sent it. Paper does not render itself useless in a power cut, right? Now, it says that at the end of the day, there is that sentimental value of having the actual book versus audiobooks. All of which makes me think reading will never yield to listening completely. That, like vinyl, handwritten love letters, and cinema in the age of television, it will live on for pleasure or for romance rather, but also because there are times when nothing else quite fits the bill. But if it turns out I am wrong, well, you did not hear it from me. So this is more like a conversational type of talk. And then glossary. Please, if you are not sure, you must also read the glossary so that the context makes sense. And then, of course, this is coupled with text B. Let's see to what extent text B supports text A. We have a lady with headphones driving, and it says, take an adventure through Amazon. And then it says, your commute just got a lot more interesting with audible.com. With thousands of books to choose from, you can listen to your favorite adventure novels whenever you want, so you have plenty of time to let your imagination explore the jungle. And then glossary again for text B. Amazon is a vast jungle in South America. The text in small reads as follows. Okay, I've just read that. Your commute just got a lot more interesting with audible.com. So it means that text B shows a lady who is actually driving, but yet at the same time, this lady is listening to audio or an audio book, right? Which goes hand in glove with what is presented in the text A with regard to traditional reading versus audio reading. Now, in a nutshell, once you are done reading all these series of paragraphs for this comprehension, one gets a sense that the author tried by all means to present both negative and positive of either traditional reading versus also audio reading, to say what are the benefits or positives of audio reading versus the negativity and so forth. So in hindsight, the concluding paragraph say, all of which makes me think reading will never yield to listening completely. So the point of departure for this for the author is that reading will never yield to listening completely. That, like vinyl, handwritten love letters, and cinema in the age of television, it will live on for pleasure or for romance, but also because there are times when nothing else quite fits the bill. But if it turns out that I'm wrong, well, you did not hear it from me. So he's sort of leaving us in suspension as a food for thought with regard to understanding the migration between audiobooks versus reading traditional books. So you need to establish what the comprehension is about, what is presented, the line of argument here, the inclusion of factual information from studies and from, for example, I believe like paragraph 5. Yet the idea prevails that listening is a flight or unserious, as noted 55% of respondents to this was a study that was done in 2016 deemed audiobooks a lesser way of consuming literature, because only 10% at that period in time considered listening to books in comparison to reading the actual book. So for as long as you do this and you are in a position to thoroughly understand what the text is about, then now we can go to the questions. Right. Use your reading time in paper 1 to familiarize yourself with the text. You are not allowed to underline or highlight during reading time. However, you can begin to gain an understanding of the text. Remember that in paper 1, the unfamiliar aspect of the paper is what you are given to read and view. You know what type of questions will be asked. We have already gone through the type of questions. However, you haven't seen the article or visual text. Read the question, and reading the questions can help you to identify aspects of the article that you need to pick out for lower order questions. However, you will need a holistic understanding of what the text is about to accurately answer middle order to higher order questions. Now, the first 3 questions are normally your lower order question. Let's look now into question 1.1. Why does the writer use the word eat repeatedly in paragraph 1? If you were listening to me when we were reading this comprehension, you already have the answer. It's even there. I think I've highlighted it. Here it is. Right? That there's a repetition of it, and then the question would be then why. This is a question about the repetition. Repetition is used to highlight something or create what emphasis. Your job in answering this type of a question is to explain then why, the reason for this repetition. Now the answer will be the writer wants to create emphasis or curiosity, or to arouse curiosity for the reader's interest, to create suspense or engage what the reader. Because remember, when we were reading paragraph 1, I said to you what is important here. Let me go back. Insomniac do it in the middle of the night. Dog owners do it while trotting around the park. Some people do it in the gym, but lately I have taken to doing it. Now, there's no mention of the it that the author refers to here. Hence, I had question mark to say it means that the answer to the it part, we are going to get it when we read the succeeding paragraphs. Now, the question is, why then the repetition of this it? Because nothing is mentioned. It's just the pronoun it. We don't know what is it. So the purpose of this repetition, it was indeed to create emphasis or curiosity, and I can even say interest, for the reader to want to read more, so that ultimately we find out what does that it refers to. So that is how you respond to the first question. Refer to paragraph 2. Grade 12s, please don't be too excited and answer haphazardly. When you are directed to refer to a particular paragraph, go back to that particular paragraph for you to be able to deduce answers. Explain why listening to audiobook is regarded as a generational shift, right? And if you are listening to me when I analyze the comprehension, you'll realize that already we've got answers to many of the questions that are going to follow, because we practice what we call close reading. We read, then we thoroughly analyze the comprehension. A question like this requires you to interpret what generational shift means. The word shift, it means what? Change. So we want to see that change between the two generations, meaning the older generation and the current generation. For 2 marks, make sure that you indicate the shift or change that has been. Go back to paragraph 2 and look at this phrase in context. The context will provide you the clues to answer the question. Now quickly, let us go to paragraph 2. Listening, that is, and perhaps more specifically, listening to things you might once have read instead. The growth of audiobooks, podcasts, and even voice notes, those quick self-recorded clips that are steadily taking over the typed message on WhatsApp, reflect a steady generational shift away from eyes. And already I've analyzed it. Eyes represent reading, to ears represent what? Listening. As the way we take in the world, and perhaps also in how we understand it. So you can see that when you practice close reading, it becomes effortless for you to come up with the responses. Now, the previous generation processed information through reading. Remember that we spoke about what the eyes, whereas the current generation prefers what? Listening, which now, hence the author refers to what? Ears. So here is the shift that we are talking about. And this is how you answer. You see, it's easier to get, if you can even totalize this section by simply interpreting questions accordingly and making sure that the manner in which you coin your answers, you direct your response to address the key concepts of the question. Question 1.3. What does the writer mean by the expression reading instinctively feels like the higher art in line 11? We have already analyzed this when we were reading. This is a reorganization type of a question. It is asking you to explain meaning in your own words. To do this, you must show the marker that you have a good vocabulary, and you can reorganize by simply using synonyms. When we say reorganize, it does not mean you come up with new information. It does not mean you come with additional information. It does not mean you deviate from the context. Synonyms, words that mean exactly the same as the ones that are in the comprehension, but now you come up with different wording, but you are still rooting your answer in what? In the context of the comprehension. And you make sure that you are addressing the entire expression that you are given. In this case, what is meant by instinctively? What is meant by higher art? Right? Now we go back again because it says line 11. So you must always go back to the line that the examiner is talking about. And here it is. We already discussed it. Reading instinctively, meaning that understanding something naturally feels like a higher art, perhaps because bedtime stories used to be strictly for children, and oral storytelling is associated with more primitive cultures in the days before the printing press. And I said primitive, it means what? The earlier traditional, the earlier generation. So the writer means reading is automatically, generally, or natural because of the word instinctive. One, regarding as being superior or intelligent or sophisticated. And this is how you score your marks. 1.4. Account for the use of the rhetorical question in "but is it fair?" Again, grade 12s, if you can just do what I've just done, by reading and analyzing, when you see the rhetorical question, automatically ask yourself, what is the purpose of this rhetorical question? Already we have the answers in our comprehension analysis. This should start with knowledge that you bring into the exam about rhetorical questions before moving into the context. Rhetorical questions do not require an answer, so writers use them to draw attention to something or make a point. Start with that, then start what this writer is emphasizing, or the point that is being made in this article. The rhetorical question invites the reader to think about the argument. The rhetorical question prepares the reader for counter-argument, right? But I don't want you to answer it in this manner. Let's go back to the question again. Account. Remember, I said we agreed that the word account, it simply means that you must do what? You must explain. Explain the use of rhetorical question. We know that the purpose of a rhetorical question, I'm repeating, is to prompt the reader to think much more deeper about the subject that is being discussed. Now, here, what is missing is just a bit of context, right? Now, we go back to paragraph 3 quickly and assess the use of rhetorical questions, right? Here, but is it fair? Reading instinctively, okay, it says, but is it fair if the effort involved in sitting down and decoding, written words with your actual eyes were gradually faded away in years to come, just as the old-fashioned court of landline gave away to freedom of mobile phones. What exactly would have lost? The impact of the shift from traditional reading towards what? Audiobooks. So let's add a little bit of meat to our answer so that it is fully substantiated. So the answer then, it will be the rhetorical question invites the reader to think about the argument pertaining to traditional reading and listening to audio books. So you just add a bit of fact to support this so that now you contextualize. You see, now it makes sense. Discuss the irony evident in paragraph 5. If you know the terminology required for this exam, then you will know what to look for. Irony refers to what? The opposite of what is expected. Where in paragraph 5 is the opposite of expectation occurring. Look for a contrast of ideas presented and how seemingly similar things are viewed differently. To accurately discuss irony, you must show the contradiction. Ne? Start by saying X is viewed or presented in this way, then you mention then that golden conjunction, however, yet, but Y is viewed in this way, so that you can successfully demonstrate as the contradictory aspect of ideas presented in that particular paragraph. Now the answer is that listening to audiobooks is seen as lacking commitment in some quarters. Very few acknowledge that it is the ideal way of reading literature. However, people attending lectures or theater goers are not judged in a similar way. The writer highlights her argument that listening is undervalued. Yet, can you see the conjunctions? Right? Yet, research shows that students absorb the same amount of information whether they read or listen to the same text. Right? And then 1.6, refer to paragraph 6. Always refer to the said paragraph, line 42 to 47, and accidentally identify the tone used in these lines. This question simply requires you to identify the tone. Not, this is a 1 mark. Can see? Okay, great. Allow me to do this. Let me just pause a bit. Ne? Let's revisit, pardon me for this. Let's revisit question 5. Maybe I rushed to the question without really going to, now that I'm thinking about it. I don't think I've done justice as far as fully demonstrating to you how then did I read question paragraph 5 and note how the irony presented here. Now quickly let us go to paragraph 5 and then you read paragraph 5 again. Yet the idea prevails that listening is flighty or unserious. There's a line of argument that listening to audiobooks is flighty or unserious. As Noti 55% of respondents to one of YouGov survey back in 2016 deemed audiobooks a lesser way of consuming literature, and only 10% thought listening to a book was wholly equal to reading it. So here it means that they're actually criticizing listening to audiobooks in comparison to reading. The view that listening is cheating prevails, right? Even though nobody thinks it is lazy for a student to sit through lectures, and going to the theater is not considered intellectually inferior to reading the play at home. One study by Beth Rokowski, Associate Professor of Education at Bloomsburg University, asking students either to read a non-fiction book or listening to the audiobook version, found no significant difference. Now, the bone of contention here, which brings us to the aspect of irony. One, the argument says that only 10% thought that listening to a book is wholly equal to reading it, meaning that fewer people viewed or deemed listening to an audiobook less effective. But on the same wavelength, those who are going to a theater to watch the book, they are a theater is not considered. They are not considered to be intellectually inferior, which is a contradiction. Now we take it back again. We take it back again to our answer that if you know that okay. Listening to audiobook is seen as lacking commitment, because remember they said even only 10% listened to audiobooks in comparison to reading. Very few acknowledge that it is the ideal way of reading literature, right? However, what about those people who attend lectures and go to theaters? But they are not judged in the same way. So the writer highlights her arguments that listening is undervalued, yet research shows that students absorb the same amount of information whether they read or they listen to the text. This is our irony, where two parts, contradictory parts, are well explained using a relevant conjunction, right? Right. Line 42 to 47, we need to identify the tone. Let's go to those lines. And to hear a book read by its author is sometimes easier to understand by the inflection of their voice, a meaning you would not otherwise have picked up. Voice notes suit perennial anxious young in much the same way because they are less intrusive than a phone call. Right? And then we go back to the question. So it's a one mark type of a question. Look for the clues regarding tone in the diction, choice of words, punctuation, and the image represented there. This will give you clues in order to identify the appropriate tone. Sometimes the tone is subjective and related to emotions, and sometimes it's more objective. Remember, I said subjective mostly is personal account. Objectives, it deals with facts, where it is assertive, matter of fact, objective. The writer uses persuasive, assertive, matter of fact, and a conversational tone. And then how did we arrive there? How is it persuasive? How is it conversational? And to hear a book read by its author is sometimes easier to understand. A personal account that is persuasive because of the words such as easier to understand. This is persuasive. Suit the perennial anxious young in much the same way because they are less, to say it is less intrusive. Again, it's persuasive, meaning that he is giving you the reasons as to why audiobooks are much more important rather as well. So from the word choice, we are able to come up with the correct tone of the author. All right. Comment on the suitability of the tone used. If you say I'm using an angry tone, it must suit the context. If I'm shouting at you, I'm yelling at you, I can use a sharp tone, a hurting tone, because I'm angry, I'm furious. So the tone is applicable to the context. Now, comment on the suitability. Why is this tone suitable? Remember, there must be synergy between context, what is being presented, and the tone in which it is presented. After identifying the tone, you are now asked to comment on its suitability. A question about suitability of tone is asking you to identify how the tone adds to the writer's intention for the article or paragraph. How does it help the writer to get the point across? How does it affect the readers to engage with the article in a positive manner? The writer's tone highlights the benefits of listening in that it eliminates misinterpretations, right? Thereby leading the greater clarity. The pronoun you addresses the reader directly, thereby reinforcing the writer's view of the benefits of what? Of listening. So you simply take the same tone that you have identified and then justify why is it appropriate in relation to the facts that are presented by the author there. Now, as we move along now, we are going to go to your higher order questions, grade 12. Critically discuss how the diction in paragraph 7 convey the writer's attitude towards print media. Provide 2 examples of diction in your response. So, what is important here is that we are going to critically discuss. It means that you are going to fully substantiate, right? And then we are going to come up with diction, choice of words, and to round off our response, how are these words relating to the attitude in paragraph 7? Diction questions are asking about word choice. To answer this question, you must identify the writer's attitude and find words in the paragraph. Remember, context, anything that you say must be deduced from what you have just read, that make the attitude obvious. Learn words that describe attitude and tone so that you are equipped to answer these type of questions. That's what you call a tone wheel, where you have a wheel with lots of adjectives that describes different types of tones and mood. Please make sure that you enrich your vocabulary so that your vocabulary is not limited to identify the correct tone, or to use the correct adjective rather to identify the correct tone. Right, now we cannot go to the answer without reading or revisiting paragraph 7. Now when you read paragraph 7 again, what will be your driving point? Your driving point will be, I need to be mindful of diction so that I can establish the writer's attitude towards print media. And then I must come up with 2 examples. Now we go to paragraph 7. What troubles me about listening, I suppose, is that it is harder to share, right? You cannot recommend a podcast to a friend, but you can leave it on the train seat for the next person when you get off. As I have done all my life with finished newspapers, you cannot give your goddaughter your dog-eared, spine-cracked copy of an audiobook that meant everything to you when you were her age. You will never buy an old audiobook from a second-hand store and find somebody else's faded notes scribbled in the margin, or a long-forgotten postcard used as a bookmark that makes you want to know more about the life of the person who sent it. Paper does not render itself useless in a power cut. So, what is his attitude towards print media? What is the writer's attitude towards print media, with key reference to the diction that is used? The writer is sentimental and uses compound adjectives such as dog-eared, spine-cracked to qualify the longevity of books or newspaper. The reference to faded notes scribbled in the margin and a long forgotten postcard used in a bookmark convey the writer's nostalgia. The writer thus emphasized the value of print media, which she believes cannot be replaced by audiobooks. The ephemeral nature of audiobooks is highlighted. So what is important is that in paragraph 7, the writer shows that she shares sentimental perspective towards the value of what print media. And for you to justify this, answer like this by borrowing examples from the text itself to support your idea. Then refer to paragraph 8. Is the final paragraph an appropriate conclusion to the article? Justify your response. This is a familiar question. Examiners will always want to ask you about the effectiveness of the concluding paragraph. Is it effective to cement the ideas presented in the comprehension? Now here, this question may be coined differently, but what is important is that you must have the skill of reading the concluding paragraph and reaching a conclusion to say, does it sum up, does it summarize, or does it still leave us in hanging or in suspension? Is the final paragraph appropriate conclusion to the article? Justify your response. This is an evaluation question. You can answer it by saying either yes or no. It does not matter. However, remember, we are not marking yes or no. We are marking your reason. However, you will get no marks for saying yes or no. The marks come from the justification you have just been asked to. And of course, make sure that you know why you are saying yes or no. If you know why you are answering yes or no, you are able to justify your response. The justification should be rooted in something that can be seen in the article. Please, home language candidates, again, context. Even if you are asked a slightly opinion-based question, still root that question in the context of the comprehension. Stating whether or not this paragraph is an appropriate conclusion requires you to show an understanding of the article as a whole. Your answer should include reference to the article as a whole. And then we can have few examples, but before we look into my answers, let's go to the concluding paragraph quickly. All of which makes me think you will never yield to listening completely, that like vinyl, handwritten, love letters, and cinema. And it's exactly what I said when I was analyzing the comprehension. Guys, I hope you were listening. That the I almost said the poet. The author here seemed to cement his line of argument to say all of which makes me think reading will never yield to listening, by using the word never, meaning that you cannot compare reading to listening completely. Just like vinyl, handwritten love letters, and cinema in the age of television, it will live on for pleasure or for romance, but also because there are times when nothing else quite fits the bill. But if it turns out I'm wrong, well, you did not hear it from me. So at the end of the day, the comprehension presented both negative and positive aspects of both listening to audiobooks versus reading traditionally. But now, as a concluding paragraph, the author is able to give us his stance to say at the end of the day, reading can never yield completely to what? To listening. Now, I would say, allow me to condition you. Always say yes, so that you can use evidence from the text to support your answer. Simple as it is, right? Yes, the author asserts the belief that reading will never be entirely replaced by listening. Can you see that this line is the same as one in the comprehension? It is only written differently. Hence, we speak about paraphrasing and using synonyms to evaluate questions. The author asserts the belief that reading will never be entirely replaced by listening, as books or print media have an authentic and purposeful quality. However, the final sentence humorously offers the reader an opportunity to differ from the writer's opinion. But, for example, he says, but if it turns that I am wrong, the conclusion supports the writer's balanced views presented throughout the article, that both listening and reading have value in different contexts. And it's exactly what I've just said, that the nub of the comprehension presented both negative balance the line of argument between negative aspect and versus positive aspect of both listening to audiobooks compared to reading traditionally. Refer to text B. Now we go to text B. How does audible.com contribute to a more enjoyable journey? The driver has the ability to listen to her favorite books using her imagination whilst driving. This one is straightforward, ne? Right. And then so 1.10, so you have plenty of time to let your imagination explore the jungle. Identify how the imagery jungle is depicted in the visual image, provide its purpose. This time the question directs you to visual image. Now, you know how you are focusing on the picture. Note that this question has two parts. You have to answer both to get 2 marks. The first part is simply to identify, write down the jungle as depicted. Then the second part is about the purpose. What does the depiction add to the understanding of the image for the reader or the viewer? And the response will be, the graphic images depict the exploration of a jungle by a jaguar wildcat at the window of her car, and an explorer's head superimposed on her head, around her shoulder, plants on the steering wheel. This image illustrates her thought process or content for the audiobook. Now let's go back to the image. I always say that you must write what you see, right? A lady is driving, we see that head, and then we see the image here, which further again goes hand in glove with the description. So whenever you are asked about question pertaining to let me just pause a bit. Yeah, if the question pertaining to the correlation or synergy, for you to demonstrate synergy between text A and B, you describe text B, and then after describing text B, you match the description with what the question requires. Then this is how you fully respond to questions of showing synergy between text A and B. Comment on the effectiveness of the portrayal of a woman in conveying the message of text B. This is a question that requires you to identify the message of text B. If you in your answer, you must clearly state that the message is. You must also identify how the woman is portrayed. Does she look happy or sad? Does she look comfortable or uncomfortable? Does she look engaged or bored? Once you have narrowed these elements down, you state how she portrayed and then link that to the message of the text. The woman is calm, engrossed demeanor reveals that listening to an audiobook enhances her journey. Her ability to focus on both the story and driving is evident. The portrayal of a woman conveys the message that audible.com can change a dreary commute into a flight of fantasy. Or the woman's expressionless face does not reveal her being entertained by the audiobook. She appears to be more focused on her driving than on enjoying her exercise. So for open-ended questions where you need to either say yes or no, check where you have more substantive reason, and then choose that part. Right. Refer to text A and B. Critically discuss the extent to which text B support the subheading from audiobooks to understand the world, and paragraph 4 of text A. The final question of the comprehension will always be a comparison question that requires you to make connection between text A and text B. Take note of the limitations in the question. In this case, we are only looking for the subheading and paragraph 4, right? So of the article, connections made to aspect of the article not found in the subheading or paragraph 4 will not be credited. For 4 marks, look how many marks. You will need to make 2 good connections to ensure that you are making clear and obvious connection. Consider structuring your answer as follows. In the subheading or paragraph 4 of the text A, then you give details. This is supported by found in text B. Or in text B, or text B depicts a picture of a woman who is driving whilst listening to which support as stated in paragraph 4. Right. Now let's go back to paragraph 4 quickly. Reading is still very far from dead. Lockdown rekindled the love of curling up with a good novel to publishers' delight, with more than a third of people claiming to be reading more to fill their days. But the audiobook market, while still small, also notched up its 7th year of double-digit growth in 2021. Millennials in particular seem to be all yes, right? And then actually I listen, I don't read, right? Then again, you have a sense of idea of what the paragraph is about. Now we need to make a connection between the text and paragraph 4. Now we start. In text B, the woman represents the millennials who are easily able to multitask by listening to an audio whilst driving. Remember, this is what? Description. You describe the image. Then after describing the image, what do? You contextualize by matching the description with constructs or ideas in which paragraph 4. This supports the reference to the generational shift in the subheading, showing a preference for listening, and the statement in paragraph 4, they seem to be what? All ears. In paragraph 4 of text A, the writer references a survey conducted by Wall Street Journal president, which concluded that young people preferred listening to reading. However, this phenomenon is not restricted to young generation. The statement, frantically multitasking midlifers, going for a run or cooking dinner, which is there in paragraph 4, line 27 to 30, is echoed in the message of text B, which shows the woman listening to an audiobook whilst multitasking, meaning that whilst doing what? Whilst driving. As easy as that. As easy as that, and then you fully substantiate, you show synergy between the two, guided by the question. Grade 12s, I hope this is going to be a very, very beneficial and insightful lesson, and I'm wishing you all of the best once more. Go out there and make sure that you collect marks in comprehension. Thank you.